Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Senator John Kennedy, in a recent interview, had he's one known for a turn of a phrase. This is one of his better ones. This is P.G. O'Rourke quality here.
It turns, you see the worst in people, I know many people in Washington, D.C. that they would unplug your life support to charge their cell phone.
What did he say?
Unplug your life support to charge your cell phone.
Yeah.
That's the swamp. And, yeah, right. So you have the worst in people and the worst people. Right. We've started to notice, at least many of us, this is an important note, Just the News reported. A watchdog group entitled Protect the Public's Trust is sounding a siren that the Biden administration plans to make it very difficult for Trump to drain the swamp were he to be elected. The director of this watchdog organization said some of the appointees, Biden appointees, may receive special career civil service protections before Trump would start a second term if he wins, hamstringing his ability to control his own Justice Department or to Trump-proof the federal government. Without getting into the particulars, I mean, this is something that is central to a second term. Even if Republicans don't have control of both chambers, even if they didn't have control of either chamber. It seems to me the most pressing demand in a second term for Trump, where the left is just going to attempt to wait him out, is going to attempt to use lawfare to block whatever moves that he attempts to make. It seems to me that he needs to spend the preponderance of his time taking apart the administrative state. If he doesn't replace the first two levels of every cabinet agency and riff, I don't know, another 20, 30, 40, 50% of these agencies, if he doesn't really focus his energies and his political power on reducing the size and scope of the administrative state, including law enforcement and spy agencies, then all this will have been for naught. So this is a sort of a below the fold amid all the quality of life issues that are on the ballot. But this is so important because it directly relates to all of those quality of life issues, because the deterioration in Americans' quality of life and the expanse of our constitutionally guaranteed freedoms, I mean, this is the real problem. It's Leviathan. And maybe this is something Trump should discuss at tomorrow night's debate. For more on this and other matters, please be joined by John Hinderaker, president of the Center for the American Experiment and contributor to PowerlineBlog.com. John, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, great to be with you, Dan.
Well, so you've heard what I think would be central to a Trump second term, and I don't want to get over my skis here, but thinking about that as a topic of conversation that may not be as anticipated as some of the other ones tomorrow night.
Well, it certainly deserves to be. This is a long-standing problem, Dan. A Republican can get elected president, but that doesn't mean that he can actually direct the executive branch. He appoints, the top two levels, top three levels, and the rest is civil service, and the rest in most agencies is probably 90 or 95% Democrat. So a Republican president is always dealing with passive resistance and with active efforts to undermine his policies. And to be effective, a Republican president has got to figure out a way to deal with that.
And on the other side, Richard Grenell, former Trump administration veteran, tweeted out over the weekend, Arab American leaders in Detroit have been told by the Kamala campaign that Keith Ellison is on the short list to be attorney general should she win. What would a AG Keith Ellison mean, since you hail from the state in which he's the current attorney general, John?
Well, it's almost impossible to believe, Dan. Ellison himself has denounced that as a false rumor, which is, he says, is with the intent of stirring up hatred of Muslims, right?
Of course, right.
Of course. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully it won't come to that because Kabbalah will lose. Ellison is a hardcore left-wing radical who, among other things, has endorsed the riots and the political violence carried out by Antifa. So here's a guy, he's the Attorney General of a state, and he's come out in favor of political violence.
What bystander at the Feeding Our Future scandal? Can you tell us about that?
Well, sure. You can say that about the entire Tim Walz administration. I mean, this deserves a lot more publicity. The Feeding Our Future scandal, somewhere between $250 million and $500 million was stolen from the taxpayers by fraudsters here in Minnesota. It's the biggest single COVID-era fraud that has been uncovered, and it was a blatant fraud. These people put in for reimbursement for ostensibly feeding free meals to hundreds of thousands of needy children who were non-existent. Their children didn't exist. And the Walz administration, including Keith Ellison, the Attorney General, just sat on it and watched it happen, even after it came to light that this was going on. And then they tried to blame everybody else under the sun, when in fact it was their malfeasance.
Speaking of Field Marshal Tim, you reported over at PowerlineBlog.com yet another instance of apparent fabulism on behalf of Tim Walz's, on behalf of Tim Walz, from Tim Walz. So in addition to his military service, in addition to his vaunted coaching career, he misrepresented his academic credentials.
Yeah, for something like 11 years, he kept saying and putting in writing on his congressional bio and so forth that he was just on the verge of obtaining his Ph.D. in education, the same Ph.D., I think, by the way, that Dr. Jill Biden has. And in fact, he never took any coursework or did anything to pursue that alleged degree subsequent to, 2004 or something like that. And the school that he had attended briefly confirmed that, no, it's been 20 years since he actually did any coursework here. So he's now quietly deleted that claim from his bio.
So give us a profile on this guy. I mean, since you know him better than most, I mean, and just these instances of exaggeration, fabulism. I mean, we're used to it with Biden, to some extent Harris too. But I mean, Walz just seems like he's sort of this big dumb lummox who hasn't really done much with his life, managed to get elected by buffaloing some rural voters in Minnesota and work his way up, and now he's just sort of lying about a life he hasn't led.
Yeah, that's basically true. And sometimes the lies are positive, like claiming credit for a military career that's far beyond what he actually did. Sometimes they're in self-defense. He lies continually about the drunk driving conviction that he had back when he was living in Nebraska, still lies about it. So, yeah, Tim Walz is an interesting case. I mean, the man can't open his mouth, really, without telling a lie. But beyond that, he is a really hardcore, bitter partisan. He is on the far left wing of the Democratic Party, and you see it all the time. I mean, there is no left-wing policy that Tim Walz does not endorse.
Well, do people in Minnesota like him? You know, are they
elected
excited
him.
about that?
Well, they keep electing Democrats, Amy. I mean, it's so interesting. Republicans haven't won a statewide race in Minnesota since 2006, right? And the reason for that is that the Democrats have got a machine, a ballot-producing machine in Hennepin County that turns out so many votes, or so many ballots anyway, that it just swamps rural Minnesota, where Walz is deeply unpopular. His margin of victory in 2022 was cut about in half compared to his margin of victory in 2018. So it's not like he is exceptionally popular with the voters in Minnesota. He isn't. But in recent years, if you're running statewide and you can run up the vote in Hennepin County and you've got a D by your name, you know, you're in good shape.
What's your expectation for tomorrow's debate and your hope in terms of what would be the best outcome for Trump?
Well, my expectations are pretty low, to be honest, Dan. I mean, Kamala Harris's mission is to perform better than Joe Biden did in June. That's a very low bar. It means she's got to remain standing for an hour and a half. She needs to keep her words flowing and not zone out like Biden did, and if possible, try not to laugh. And if she does those things, her supporters will be happy and the press will report that she was brilliant. On Trump's side, he needs to continually be talking about his winning issues. He needs to talk about the border, the cost of living, crime, and he can't let the moderators, they're going to try to drag him off onto every other issue under the sun. They probably will want to spend half the debate talking about abortion, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And Trump has just got to take every opportunity to get back to those winning issues.
John Hinderaker, President and Center of the American Experiment, contributor to PowerlineBlog.com as well. John, thank you as always.
Great to be with you, Dan.
Take care. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
This is Carol Platt-Liebau for townhall.com. Last week, Kamala Harris met the press for the first time since being anointed her party's nominee. If you can call a gentle 18-minute, heavily edited